Welcome back. You're still watching The World Today on Channels Television. And next we go to our London correspondent, Juliana Olayinka, who's been following the Ike Ekweremadu story. She joins us now from London. Hello, Juliana. It's good to see you.
Nice to see you, Anne.
All right. So let's begin with an update on where we are on this case.
Well, this mammoth trial involving the former Deputy Senate President, as you said, Ike Ekweremadu, has reached its 7th week. And I must stress that when I have kept repeating that it is incredibly complicated and complex, is pretty much an understatement, because, of course, this trial about an alleged organ harvesting plot involving the 60-year-old senator as well as his 56-year-old wife Beatrice, their 25-year-old daughter Sonia, and a fourth defendant, Obinna Obeta, spans 2 jurisdictions. I'll start with today, if you allow me, because I was at the Old Bailey this morning where I was reporting live for Channels Television News earlier in the day, and it was to oversee the second day of cross-examination by the prosecution lawyers for Beatrice Ekweremadu. And as to be expected, it was pretty emotional. There were a couple of outbursts of tears. Beatrice Ekweremadu, who is a trained accountant, was pretty much clear that she is standing by her husband, who she told jurors was a decent man, a good man, and a man that she trusted. I believe she was emphasizing this information because the KCs are trying to build a case to the court that this was a family who knew exactly what they were doing, that Beatrice Ekweremadu stood shoulder to shoulder with her husband and was fully aware that they were committing criminal offences that I should say they all deny. One thing that was clear in court today is that she did lie. She did lie and say, yes, she was aware that she went along with an alleged plot to try and convince doctors at this Royal Free Hospital in Hampstead, where this potential kidney donation was to take place, that this alleged victim, who cannot be named for legal reasons, was a distant cousin of Sonia. When asked by the prosecution lawyers why she went along with the lie, she said that it was to save her daughter, that they had got to a certain stage in the process, that if she backed out at that point, her daughter couldn't be saved. It's worth just confirming as well that Sonia Ekweremadu will not be standing at the dock to defend her case. She also gave a no-comment interview when she was questioned by the police last year, and the trial continues. Worth mentioning as well, very briefly, Anne, that the senator has taken to the stand. According to him, his family have been scammed by Dr. Obinna Obeta and any of the other middlemen, including his own brother, Diwa Ekweremadu, who was involved and was some sort of facilitator between Dr. Obinna and this alleged victim, and that the money, which we don't know was between perhaps 1.5 million and 3.5 million, the equivalent of about £3,000 to £7,000, was given because it was asked of them, but they were scammed out of doing it. It has been a very emotional trial. Like I said, it's been going on for about 7 weeks. There have been emotional outbursts. Some of the facts that we do know is that we now know that this alleged victim did lie to the police initially. If we all cast our minds back to when it first came into the public domain, what we were told is that the Ekweremadus had kind of plucked a homeless 15-year-old off the streets of Lagos and brought him here to harvest his organ. We now know as a fact that this man wasn't 15 years old. He wasn't homeless. In fact, he was earning about 3,000 naira a day. So it is incredibly complicated, as it sounds. But the trial does continue at the Old Bailey, and we're expecting it to reach its culmination, if not this week, certainly next.
That was going to be my next question. When we actually think, or the likely time this will all reach its climax?
It's been such a lengthy trial,
Sure.
Anne, and I've got to tell you as well, there are very, very strict reporting conditions which have been placed on the media by the judge and by the prosecution lawyers. I believe that Beatrice Ekweremadu may be the final defendant to take the stand. As I said, she began her testimony yesterday. It continued on to today. We're expecting perhaps that there could be some closing arguments, but then again, lots of questions for the Crown Prosecution Service too about how this information was leaked. There has been so much evidence that have been withdrawn and been put towards the jury, including years of text messages. Of course, there are so many individuals involved too, like this Diwe Ekweremadu, who I believe is a brother of Ike Ekweremadu, who played a significant part in this case. Unfortunately, he is nowhere to be found. And when questioned by the prosecution as to whether or not they know his whereabouts, they're getting no information back from the Ekweremadu. So much of what has been said and read in court is hearsay. We know that the jury cannot take any of that into consideration. And the fact that one of the main witnesses, the centre of this case, Sonia Ekweremadu, 25 years old, who has been extremely sad, as you would expect. Her countenance has been incredibly low during the trial. She has a debilitating kidney disease. She has to go through severe dialysis treatment. She is refusing to testify, and she refused to comment during a police interview. So who knows what the outcome of this case is? But I am expecting that certainly by the end of the month, we will find out whether or not the jury find the main defendant, Senator Ike Ekweremadu, one of the most powerful men in Nigeria prior to his arrest, getting off a plane from Turkey in the summer of last year in London, will be found guilty of these pretty serious crimes.
All right. Thank you very much, Juliana. With so many revelations coming out of this case, we'll definitely be keeping tabs on this developing story. Thanks a lot, Juliana Olayinka. Away from stories now, let's go back to the Swedish Prime Minister, Ulf Kristersson. He says the likelihood that Finland will join the NATO military alliance before Sweden has already increased. Speaking alongside Sweden's chief negotiator, Oscar Stenström, earlier today, Prime Minister Kristersson also said that it's only a matter of time before Sweden will become a member. Sweden and Finland applied to join NATO just last year, but they have faced objections from Turkey, which says the two countries harbor members of what it considers terrorist groups. The countries resumed talks on the process in Brussels just last week. Ankara has been clear it has greater objections to Sweden's accession than to Finland's, and Mr. Kristersson said that Turkey's position in that regard still remains, meaning that the two Nordic countries might not even join together as they would have preferred. A few days before the 12th anniversary of the Syrian crisis, the UN Commission of Inquiry on the Syrian Arab Republic has already called for an independent investigation for the failure that they witnessed by the Syrian government and the international community to rapidly direct urgent life-saving aid to northwest Syria after the massive earthquake struck on February. According to that report by the Commission, it took the Syrian government a full week to consent to life-saving cross-border aid access. It says the government and opposing Syrian National Army both impeded cross-lines aid to affected communities, while Hayat Tahrir al-Sam in northwest Syria refused cross-line aid from Damascus. The report concludes that parties to the conflict in Syria committed widespread human rights violations and abuses in the months leading up to the earthquakes, continuing a decade-long pattern of failures to protect Syrian civilians found in the Syrian Commission. Japan says that North Korea must step up further provocative actions, including missile launches and conducting nuclear tests following North Korea's 2 short-range ballistic missiles, which was launched in its east coast. According to the Chief Cabinet Secretary, Hirokazu, Japan will continue to cooperate closely with the United States and South Korea, collect and analyze necessary information, and even take all possible measures for peace and safety. The missile launch comes as South Korea and the United States are now conducting their largest joint military drill in years, and 2 days after North Korea test-fired what it called 2 strategic cruise missiles from a submarine. Well, it also comes less than 1 week after North Korea leader Kim Jong-un ordered the military to intensify drills to deter and respond to a real war if necessary. The Israeli parliament has advanced a bill that will allow it to overrule Supreme Court rulings and enact laws that had been struck down despite months of protest against it. The Knesset also took until the early hours of this morning to pass the first reading of that bill, which has been one of the main priorities of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his governing coalition of far-right and ultra-Orthodox religious parties. Late on Monday night, in another win for Mr. Netanyahu, the parliament advanced a bill that would make it harder to remove the prime minister over corruption charges and still hang over him. The bill would allow the parliament to declare Mr. Netanyahu unfit to rule only for physical or mental reasons, and it will replace current law that opens doors for a leader to be removed under any circumstance. Earlier today, protesters blocked the road by the Prime Minister's office and the government office compound in protest of these judicial changes. The UK, US and Australia have unveiled details of their plans to create a new fleet of nuclear-powered submarines aimed at countering China's influence in Indo-Pacific region. Under the AUKUS Pact, Australia is to get its first nuclear-powered subs, at least 3 from the United States. Beijing has strongly criticized the significant naval deal. Its foreign ministry on Tuesday accused the 3 nations of walking further and further down the path of error and the path of danger. However, US President Joe Biden says the deal is aimed at bolstering peace in the region, emphasizing that submarines will be nuclear-powered and not nuclear-armed. Meanwhile, Australia says that it has offered China a briefing over its nuclear-powered submarine deal with the United States and Britain, but is not aware of any response from Beijing. According to the Defense Minister, Richard Marles, the government has made more than 60 calls over the last week to leaders, including in the Pacific and Southeast Asia, to inform them about this agreement known as the AUKUS Pact.
There has been a huge diplomatic effort which has underpinned the announcement today, and that's been going on for months, but it's particularly been going on over the last week. Between myself, the Minister for the Pacific in this context, the Foreign Minister, and indeed the Prime Minister. We've made more than 60 calls to regional and world leaders within the Pacific, within ASEAN, within our Five Eyes partners. I'll let those countries speak for themselves, but I am very grateful for the response that we have received. We watch the global rules-based order being placed under enormous pressure in Eastern Europe, but also in the Indo-Pacific. And we are witnessing the biggest conventional military build-up that we have seen since the end of the Second World War. And it's happening within our region. And it is not Australia which is doing that. And we need to respond to this. A failure to do so would see us be condemned by history. We want to be completely transparent with our neighbours and with the world about what we're doing and why we're doing it. What our strategic intent is. Our concern about other military build-ups is that they happen in a manner which is opaque and where neighbours are left uneasy as to why it is occurring. That is why we have gone to such an effort to make clear exactly why we are taking the steps that we're taking. Thank you, everyone.
We have Global Affairs Analyst Edward Oppa joins us now for more on this. Hello, Mr. Oppa. Thank you for joining us on The World Today.
Well, thank you for having me.
What are your thoughts on the details of this deal? Do you agree that it's a necessary venture for the deterrence of war in the Indo-Pacific region?
Well, sometimes you have to show some force in order for peace to actually exist. The Chinese government, the Communist Party of China has over the years been doing whatever they wanted, encroaching on other nations, claiming areas that normally they shouldn't, and people have allowed them or just waited for them to be reasonable member of nations, but they have shown that they want power. And so what you see is a response to the actions that China is doing, by this pact. Whether this is going to lead to a war, I seriously doubt it. But it's always good, to be very vigilant and be able to keep an eye on somebody, as I don't want to use the word irresponsible, as China has tried to do over the years. So. Yes, it's good. Australia needed it, and the UK, US, and just came in to say we're there for you. We're going to back you. There are a lot of jobs to be created. There are a lot of technologies to be deployed. Is this going to happen tomorrow? Nobody knows. But at least now, China is going to either pull back and keep an eye and know that the rest of the world is not happy with the way they've been doing things.
But how do you expect China to react to this deal? We already know it had accused the three nations, in their words, walking further and further down the path of error and danger.
Well, China will do what China, is doing. Remember when the Speaker of the House went to Taiwan, China said if she flies in there, they're going to shoot the plane. They didn't do it. China has become a toothless barking dog. Because when they do it, they say what they're going to do, and then when they're taking on to it, they don't do anything. So, they're going to react, but they triggered, their behavior triggered what these three nations have decided to do. And so, they might just say that, and then the next thing they move on to something else. That's China for you. The typical Chinese person don't want confrontation, but they want to sneak up on you when you're not suspecting. That's why they're in Africa doing what they're doing. But when you confront them, they back off. And then they try to, reinvent themselves to see what else they can do. So whatever it is they are doing, I don't think they can. If push comes to shove, they're going to be able to handle the force that's going to come from UK, US, and Australia. So we're just going to watch. But again, in the meantime, there's jobs are going to be created, money are going to be spent. The military is an industrial sector of its own. So when they do these things, they spend money building whatever it is they build, whether they're going to finally use it. Less than 5% of the time is when they use it. But at least jobs get created out of it. So by these sort of reaction or action, by default, employment are being created or jobs are being created.
Well, Mr. Oppa, you've called China a toothless dog, which means sometimes they say they'll do something and they don't end up doing it. But are we underestimating the strength of China? What if they do in some cases? What will be the turnout of it?
Well, I wish I have a magic wand to tell you, or a soothsayer to say what China, but China not going to do anything. They want the world to see them as they want to be a superpower by default or by design. They don't really have the military capability. They have a bunch of people. They have the largest army in the world by sheer size of their population. But are those soldiers been? Can they fight the war? China hasn't had any war in a recent memory. So. But they want people to recognize that they want to be a superpower. They spend a lot of money on their defenses, but at the end of the day, if there's going to be boots on the ground, I don't think China will survive. Whatever is going to be unleashed on them.
In the last 2 years, Mr. in the last 2 years, let's just say that because in the last 2 years, China has increased its military, its superpower by 50%. I mean, it's the largest in terms of Navy, Army. They're at a rapid pace. I mean, they're building up their military, their defense, and all of that. Why do you think this is happening if we're actually calling China a toothless dog?
Well, I mean, by the sheer size of their population, 1.3, 1.4, whatever that number is, I mean, the population of China is bigger than that of Africa, is bigger than that of North America, and that of Europe. So, yeah, of course, they're going to spend money, but it's, what are they spending it on? They don't have some of the most sophisticated weapon system in the world. Some of these wars is going to be won by Navy, by the Air Force, and the ground troops. So does China have those things? No, they don't. China don't have sophisticated Air Force attack system. And, why are they frightened? If they are a superpower, why are they frightened? Because of a submarine, that is being built that they don't even know is going to be used. A superpower, fine, you do it, they're still going to do what they want, but they're not. So they are just being afraid, and then they're just going to let the world know that, this is an unfair treatment. But again, if China has remained, a responsible member of the world, do their commerce, as opposed to trying to force themselves on nations, using all kinds of tricks. The world wouldn't be reacting the way they are. Most people are not happy with China. You go to China and you see 95% of their people are still very poor, but they want to create this image of, we are here, we can solve problems for you. No, inside China is still a large population of people that are very, very poor. So the world is waking up to their trick. The world is waking up to their gamemanship, and now they're seeing that, hey, let's 3 versus 1. Let's see how they're going to survive if this push comes to shove.
We know that China is also holding U.S. debts above 30%, actually. What if they use their economic power? You've talked about a lot of people being poorer. When you see people in China, they're poor and all of that. Can they use this to hurt the global economy somehow? No,
they can't. They can't.
Wow.
I mean, again, U.S. has, enabled China because, I live here, I've been here for more than 30-something years. So, at the time he said, we don't want this job, let China do it. I mean, U.S. is the reason China is successful. Because we buy a bunch of things for them. But now, we are pushing back, like the TikTok technology. The Congress is looking at it. We want to ban it. So a lot of the things they are doing, I just wish as a native Africans that Africans can just, shut China down and look at, good relationship they should have. And that relationship should be with the former colonial powers in Europe and the U.S., where you have a bunch of Black people and build that relationship as opposed to becoming victims of China unfair lending practices. You look at it, China, the quality of what China builds in Africa is very poor because they look at it that Africans wouldn't say no, and then, the phrase of beggars have no choice because Africans just take from anybody. But I think we should begin to say no to China. We don't want China. Nobody wants to go to China and have a kid. Nobody wants to go to China and get education. So they're coming in with their money, bribing those who they can bribe and forcing themselves into Africa and some other countries. I think, it's time to push back. Again, I'm a Nigerian by birth and American by choice. I won't live in China, even if you pay me all the money. I don't, their culture don't suit me. I don't want to live in a control and command economy, which is what China is. So China, if they don't take their time, the world is going to turn their back on them, like the world is turned their back on Russia. So again, we want nations to be responsible members of the world. And if you want something, go and negotiate and make a win-win as opposed to come in and dominate in order to control. That's my take. Again, I like China as a plate, but I don't like China as a place. When you say China is like, a plate, but the way they do things, it just doesn't suit me. This is my own opinion. I don't want anything from them, in terms of money. Because you look at what is going on in Africa. Some of the loans that they made to African countries is to control them. And they bring in their own people to do this job. So even the countries that are doing it are not benefiting.
Okay, thank you very much. Being a responsible country is very important for the sake of everyone in the world. Thanks a lot, Global Affairs Analyst, Mr. Edward Okpa, for your time on The World Today.
Thank you for having me.
And in just a moment, when we return, Indonesian island of Bali plans tourist motorbike ban over misbehavior. Bring you the details. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching The World Today on Channels Television. Let's talk about bank shares in Asia and Europe. They have slumped earlier today despite reassurances from the U.S. president that America's financial system is safe following the collapse of two U.S. lenders. The fall is coming after authorities moved to protect customer deposits when the U.S.-based Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank collapsed. President Joe Biden has promised to do whatever is needed to protect the banking system after the two banks' failure raised fears about financial stability. Meanwhile, the U.S. stock markets have climbed after consumer prices rose in line with expectations. The prices in the U.S. rose 6% over the period of 12 months to the month of February. The Labor Department says that it came down from 6.4% a month earlier. Meanwhile, banking experts say the failure of the Silicon Valley Bank signals the need for more regulatory oversight of the U.S. banking system. Cornell University law professor Swalio Morova says the rollback of some regulations imposed under the Dodd-Frank reforms in the wake of the 2008 to 2009 financial crisis has made it more difficult for regulators to track the health of small to mid-sized banks. At least 190 people are now confirmed dead in Malawi after tropical storm Freddy ripped through southern Africa for the second time in 1 month. Terrifying amounts of brown water have come through neighborhoods, sweeping away homes. Malawi's commercial hub has recorded the most in terms of deaths at 158, including 36 in a landslide. The death toll is expected to rise in some areas as they remain cut off because of relentless rain and fierce winds. According to reports, rescue workers are overwhelmed and they are now using shovels to try to find survivors buried in the mud. The storm has also crippled Malawi's power supply, with most parts of the country experiencing prolonged blackouts. The government has declared a state of disaster in 10 southern districts that have been worst hit by the storm. The Indonesian island of Bali is planning to ban foreign tourists from using motorbikes after a spate of cases involving people breaking traffic laws. Under the proposals, tourists will use cars provided by travel agents instead, and the plan has been divisive as tourism continues to recover from COVID losses. More than 171 foreign nationals have violated traffic orders from late February to early March, and that's according to local police records. Some tourists have also used fake license plates. The proposed ban will be implemented via regional laws sometime this year, but how it will be reinforced is still unclear. And this is where we draw the curtains on The World Today for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Anne Mwawadu.